So good morning. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes so that everybody can enter the room. We will start just momentarily. We will allow people just one more minute to enter the room, and then we will start the webinar. Thank you for your patience. Excellent. I think we can get started. People are still entering the room, but I want to delay the start of the webinar too much because we have truly distinguished panelists today, and I want to be sure that we have enough time for them to share with you their thoughts about the future of biomedical engineering, truly the grand challenges at the interface of engineering and medicine. My name is Paolo Bonato. I'm the editor-in-chief of the IEEE Open Journal of Engineering, Medicine, Biology. We have a number of esteemed colleagues in the panel. The origin of, or the motivation of the panel today is related to an initiative that Professor Miller and Professor Subramanian led relatively recently, in which they brought together a large number of individuals, 50 individuals, key players in the field, to agree upon and discuss the grand challenges at the interface of engineering and medicine that led to a publication in IEEE OJMB that was recently posted on our website. So I will allow them to talk more about this initiative as we move forward. I'll just introduce Professor Miller and Professor Subramanian briefly. They will function as moderators of this panel discussion, and they will present a few slides. Already some are on the screen. Professor Miller is Professor and Director of Biomedical Engineering at Johns Hopkins University, is co-director of the Kavli Neuroscience Discovery Institute, is a pioneer in cutting-edge technologies and computational medicine, leading to understanding and diagnosing neurodegenerative diseases. He has received numerous awards, including the National Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering, Biomedical Engineering Thesis Award at the very beginning of his career, and then in a brilliant career and a very outstanding career, the Johns Hopkins Paul Ehrlich Graduate Student Thesis Award, the National Science Foundation Presidential Young Investigator Award, and numerous others that I'm not listing here just for the sake of time. He is an elected fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and the Biomedical Engineering Society. So we welcome Professor Miller to the panel as one of the two moderators. The other moderator is Professor Subramanian. He is a distinguished professor of bioengineering, bioinformatics and system biology, computer science and engineering, cellular and molecular medicine, and nanoengineering at University of California, San Diego. He served as chair of the Biomedical Engineering Department from 2008 and 2013 at University of California, San Diego. He was the founding director of the Bioinformatics Graduate Program at the University of San Diego. He is a fellow of the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering. He's a recipient of the Smithsonian Foundation and Association of Laboratory Automation Awards. He served as a member of the National Institutes of Health Directors Advisory Board on Bioinformatics, which resulted into the BISTI program. He is also served on bioinformatics and biotechnology advisory councils, such as the one at Virginia Tech, University of Illinois at Chicago, and he served as on the scientific advisory board of several biotech and bioinformatics company. So without further ado, Mike and Shankar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paolo. It's very kind introductions, and it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here to have this panel discussion. As Paolo pointed out, this was the result of a very large collaborative effort between 50 different individuals across the country, including multiple chairs of departments. And I would like to lead off by just very briefly introducing all the panelists. If I were to do the same introduction Paolo did, I would take probably the entire webinar. So therefore, I'm going to just be extremely brief. And you can read the bio of these folks in the webinar site. Professor Bob Langer, I mean, he absolutely needs no introduction. If you have had a shot in your arm over the last few years, you know that Bob has played a role in that shot. And I mean, the mRNA vaccines was, pioneered. Professor Barabino is the president of Olin College. She has been a tireless advocate of equity in bringing engineering to healthcare and medicine. Professor Vunjak Novakovic is, a pioneer in tissue engineering and is a very distinguished professor at Columbia University. And Professor Desai is the Dean of Engineering at Brown University and has been instrumental in drug delivery research in modern times. And so without any further ado, I want to just introduce the topics. And when we met, in fact, I was really, privileged to co-chair with Mike this meeting. And when we met, we came up with 5 grand challenges that lead to the future of at the interface of engineering and medicine. I'll walk you through each of these challenges very quickly, and then we can engender questions based on this, led off by Mike, and we'll follow up through with the panelists. So first, we thought the large group felt that bridging precision engineering and precision medicine for personalized physiology avatars is where the future is going. Imagine the scenario where we can make a virtual avatar of human physiology and pathophysiology, and that will give us an ability to interface with this avatar so that we can look at, it's like looking through the crystal glass and figuring out what's going to happen. And so this we thought was a really pioneering effort, and with the advent of AI and deep learning, this is becoming much more reality today than ever before. And so the panel, the group felt that this was a really key challenge for the forthcoming interface. Second was the pursuit of on-demand tissue and organ engineering for human health. We all see this on everyday newspaper articles where we see engineering of various organs and tissues, liver, organoids at various levels. So this is really becoming a reality where we can look at both health and disease models in these organoids, in these model systems. And so this is again something which is really being on the forefront of where the future is going. Third, revolutionizing neuroscience. The brain is the ultimate frontier in human knowledge. And we want to really see, this group felt we need to create an exobrain, a brain that would really be, something which we can study, and we can create advanced brain interface systems, bringing in AI into the picture and try to understand the ultimate in human knowledge, which is the understanding of the human brain. Fourth, engineering of the immune system in health and wellness. This was in fact prescient, because following this came COVID, and then came engineering was the key discipline which transformed the way we dealt with this infection. And I'm sure Bob will have a lot more to say about this, being a pioneer in this area. And then the last one was designing and engineering genomes for organisms for repurposing and for genomic perturbations. We already see effects of this. For example, muscular Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a debilitating disease, which is, definite leads to death with people less than 20 years. There are now efforts in terms of re-engineering through genomic engineering the protein gene which is involved in the causing the muscular dystrophy. So there are already big directions, but where's the future going? Again, we'll comment on this during the discussions. We created an Uber diagram. We just didn't stop it. The group didn't stop at saying what are the challenges. The group identified what would be the types of technologies that would be required for addressing these challenges. And the group identified what is the minimal critical knowledge that would be required for the emerging for the future, for the students who are going to be the future of this interface. What are the key technologies, key things they have to learn? And so this group really put together a gestalt view of all the requirements and the needs. And so this is really where, I mean, I would, if the audience hasn't read this paper, I would strongly suggest and recommend that this would be a good starting point for looking at these challenges. I will now turn it over to my distinguished colleague, Mike, to look at the key questions for the panelists and lead off the first question.
Thank you, Shankar. We turn to the most exciting part of our session, where we start to pepper our esteemed colleagues with key questions. So we're going to look at a series of these that we've asked our panelists as well as our participants that started on this Grand Challenge adventure to consider. So first, what are the barriers in making progress in tackling the challenges? What key technologies need to be developed to address the grand challenges? Are there cross-cutting themes that appear to link all of these challenges? What foundations, particularly important to our biomedical engineering community, does a student need to engage in addressing these challenges? How does academia and industry organize themselves to address the challenges? What is your vision? And we're going to be asking all of our colleagues about their vision for the holy grails that will emerge from addressing these challenges. And finally, we're going to put our panelists on the spot and ask them to take out their crystal balls and tell us how society will be transformed in one or more of these challenges. So how will this be organized? We're going to start with leading questions to each of the panelists. So each of the panelists will have an opportunity to answer a question, and then we're going to follow it by questions from the audience. So let me turn to my esteemed colleague from Columbia, Professor Gordana Vunčak-Novaković, and ask her to take out her crystal ball. We've done that before. We've been working together on this for quite a while, haven't we, Gordana? What is your vision for bridging precision engineering and precision medicine for personalized physiology avatars? And how do you see that all fitting together with that which you have nationally led, on-demand tissue and organ engineering for human health in the near and distant future? Thank you, Gordana, for joining us.
Yeah, first, let me thank you, Paolo, and you, Mike, and Shankar for organizing the workshop. That was fantastic, organizing this event. So these are big questions, and what is common for them is tissue engineering. So I'll be talking about this segment of Grand Challenges. And before I start, just a small comment. I just realized looking into Shankar's panel slide that all four of us, Bob, Gilda, Tejal, and me, in early 2000s, we were working on the same zip code in Boston. And it was not coincidental. I mean, this was the time when Bob just launched the whole field of tissue engineering. And then we are sort of dispersed through the country. All the Bobs stayed in the mecca of tissue engineering. So maybe it's appropriate just to start with a few comments, provide some context. Tissue engineering really evolved about 30, 40 years ago with the goal to find a way to replace or repair our tissues or even whole organs that are lost to injury and disease. Well, there are great successes. I think we will agree that growing functional human tissues from very small ones, millimeter size, to entire organs remains a grand challenge of our times. So this is not something that's done, not something that resulted in definitive broad successes on the clinical scale. The first thing to mention is that is actually to look about like what are some of the real long-standing challenges and what are some of the new challenges that we are facing today and how is the whole field evolving. Unlike a few decades ago, we are now working almost exclusively with human cells and tissues. This is incredibly important because there are huge differences between animal and human physiology in both health and disease. And I can mention just two examples, cardiovascular system and cancer, to give you an idea how much things vary from one individual to another. There is also remarkable biological diversity in human population, which is a result of biological sex, of age, of ethnic background, and the state of health and disease. And none of this can be captured or studied in animal models. So it's hugely important that we work with the human material. The personalized physiology avatars that you mentioned in your question are actually an entirely new concept that evolved much more recently, maybe 10 years ago, by capitalizing on the results of traditional regenerative medicine branch of tissue engineering and evolution in human stem cell biology. So what are they? You use a sample of stem cells that are in most cases derived from very small test tube of blood and engineer millimeter-sized tissues that are functional, that are patient-specific, and that can be connected to each other to vascular flow to communicate like tissues are communicating in our body. This is the way to model physiological processes either for a single organ or systemic events. We often call them organs on chip. This is the name that was widely adopted in the field, not because they are organs or mini organs, but because they are able to recapitulate organ level functions. For example, metabolism of liver or contractility of the muscle. Interestingly and unexpectedly, over a very short time, just years, these micro-sized platforms are being adopted both by clinical investigators and by pharmaceutical industry for modeling diseases and for evaluating drug safety and efficacy. Just recently, like end of the last year, FDA allowed the use of data obtained in these systems instead of preclinical data from animal models. This is also very important because there is now a real short path between translating discovery from the lab to going into preclinical and clinical studies. I would also like to mention that we are experiencing the change in the classical bench to bedside paradigm. So instead of developing products and technologies and then looking for their potential application, either medical or societal, and this is still a valid approach, we are now increasingly oriented on the development of medical technologies in response to the clinical needs. And these developments are again increasingly pursued by effective collaborations of clinicians and bioengineers. So you're really responding to need, you are trying to regroup and mobilize the technologies in these multidisciplinary teams to address a specific, and also to address it in a proper way to fit into the normal clinical workflow. We are also experiencing a convergence of disciplines. It is really not only like combinational methodologies, this is leading to entirely new concepts and new approaches. And it's changing the makeup of our research teams. And it is also changing quite significantly the way we train the next generation of biomedical scientists and engineers. Finally, we are focusing on an individualized patient-specific approach that translates into the idea that you articulated in one of your questions of enabling precision medicine through precision engineering. I think this is key. Engineering is at the service of medicine, responding to the needs of medicine, and the need for precision medicine is really dictating the need to establish precision engineering modalities. So what this means is that both on the organ level and on the micro level of organs on chip, we really need to faithfully recapitulate the patient's own cell biology, cell tissue structure, and tissue function, so that we can achieve true regeneration in regenerative medicine and human pathophysiology in organs on chip. So this is a kind of where we are, and now like to try to get out my crystal ball, which is the hard part. The only thing that I'm really certain about, like over all these years, I believe that engineering is easy and biology is difficult. So you know what you need to do if you are able to ask the right question, to understand what are the conditions that need to be established to instruct the cells to do the right thing. You always find a way to do it. So I think this is a kind of, it's not, I don't know, I really believe into this. Now, your question about on-demand tissue organ engineering for human health. I would like to look into the human health broadly. It is not only tissue regeneration, it's not only regenerative medicine, it is also treatment of disease. So what I envision will continue to happen is an escalation of research and application of organs on chip. They're already viewed at the fast track of tissue engineering, so things are happening quickly. Pharmaceutical industry is adopting them because there is a lack of other faithful human tissue models, and I think that this trend will continue. In the regenerative medicine, which is much more complex because of regulatory procedure and bringing cell therapy or tissue therapy into patients takes like about a dozen years, sometimes even 15 years. So this is hard. I think we will probably continue to move from simple to complex, from tissues that are easier to make, and these are typically tissues that regenerate in the body very effectively, for example, skin, blood vessels, or bone, to more complex tissues such as neural tissues or heart tissue that have very little ability to regenerate. We will also pursue the concept of simplicity by trying to replace cells themselves whenever possible by their products. So we are trying to use cell secretome, bioactive molecules, miRNAs that are identified in these studies as being important in certain processes as therapeutics. And the note I would like to finish on is that this is the era of collaboration. And I'm very optimistic because I think that grand challenges of our time can indeed be addressed through collaborative efforts of people across many different disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordana. What a wonderful way to kick off our panel. Shankar?
Yeah, let me get to the next one. So I'm sorry. Professor Lang, I know you have really, transformed our way of dealing with infection, in more ways than anyone can think of. I have a couple of questions for you. In engineering immune system for health and wellness, engineering has played a big role, and we would like your perspective, you being the pioneer in this area for mRNA vaccines and how it's transforming our fight against infections and perhaps even cancer. And then in pursuit of on-demand tissue and organ engineering for human health, what may come technologically through these areas that you are pioneering in engineering? We would love to hear your views on that.
Sure. Well, first, I thought Gordana did a spectacular job of going over the tissue engineering and organ engineering issues. Of course, I've had the pleasure of working with her for many years and being also involved in some of the amazing companies she started. But I think that, I mean, really, I hope what will come next. I mean, we see all these things like new ways of printing and bioprinting, and we certainly see trying to create all kinds of new tissues and organs. In our own lab, Gio Traverso has created an intestine on a chip, which is very exciting. Actually, we're working with Li Wei Sai, and I have a wonderful postdoc, Alice Stanton, that has actually created a brain on a chip, which is pretty remarkable. So, but I think you'll see a lot of these kinds of things, and I also agree with what Gordana said. I mean, really, part of the key to doing a lot of this is understanding the biology better. I mean, that has been a big issue. So anyhow, I want to answer that first, just because Gordana, I think explained everything very, very well, and I didn't want to go out of order in terms of these things. In terms of mRNA, well, I think engineering's again, I'm kind of prejudiced on this, but I think engineering's done just amazing things. And some of the people in our lab, actually going back many years, have really contributed to that. But just to go over a few things, I mean, probably the biggest way that engineering has enabled this has been on really the nanoparticles. When you look at the advances that have enabled mRNA to become useful, there's really a couple. I mean, one has been the modification of messenger RNA to make it, not harmful when it is, given to patients. That was done actually by biologists and chemists, Carrico and Weissman, and they won the Nobel Prize for that, last year. And then the other part has been the design of nanoparticles that could protect and deliver it to the body. And that probably, I mean, the earliest example of delivering a nucleic acid goes back to work actually when I was a postdoc with Judah Folkman. And in 1976, we published the first paper on delivering nucleic acids from tiny particles. And then, but many advances after that by many engineers. So a few of them are, the idea of pegylating nanoparticles, which was done by Ruxandra Graf when she was with us, Vladimir Torchelin, many other people. A second one was the idea of developing what are called ionizable materials. And the engineers that worked on that in our lab were Dan Pack and David Putnam. Published a paper in 2000 on that issue, which was a sort of a seminal paper. Dan is, they're now professors at in Kentucky and Cornell respectively. I should add on that it's not only engineers that have done stuff. Peter Cullis's group in Canada has done a tremendous job on ionizable lipids. Another big advance in the nanoparticles has been done by Dan Anderson and David Lin, and they're both professors in chemical engineering at MIT and Wisconsin. But this is the whole idea of creating libraries of ionizable lipids. And then another one still was Rohit Karnik, who and Omid Farrokhzad, when they were in our lab, developed the first ways of creating scalable systems like microfluidic manufacturing to produce these vaccines. So I think that, and of course, I think that there are many other kinds of engineering advances that are I think, helping, on this area. There's artificial intelligence we hear about, and that certainly, and digitalization, I think, has played a huge role. And I think what's been really important by three companies, really little companies originally, but CureVac and BioNTech in Germany, and Moderna, in Cambridge, which I had the pleasure of starting with an engineer, Nubar Fayan, who was at Flagship, and then biologists and clinicians, Derek Rossi and Ken Chen. And there's just so many great engineers working at these companies on all the different aspects. that that have been important. And so I would add to that, Pfizer has done an amazing job on the manufacturing and many other things as well, the engineers there. So I think there have been so many ways that engineers have contributed to it. And I really just mentioned a few. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Bob. Quick question. Where do you think the future is going here for a second, if you don't mind? I mean, looking through your crystal ball.
Well, I think there's two or three ways that the future's going. One are, better, well, there's quite a few things. Better purification methods of RNA. George Belford actually has done at RPI, has done some excellent work on that. I think a second way is better and better nanoparticles that are more shelf stable, nanoparticles that can target things to specific cells. So that's another big area. Another area is actually other types of messenger RNA. People are looking at circular RNA, self-amplifying RNA. These kinds of things may enable you to use less RNA or to possibly make it last longer. Those are still experimental. I mean, of course, the other thing that's really, I think, so exciting and so important about what's going on in the mRNA field are there's so many clinical trials. I mean, we hear about COVID because so many people have used it, but RSV is at the FDA right now. I think you'll see flu vaccines made by messenger RNA. That's in advanced clinical trials. To me, one of the most exciting areas of vaccines for mRNA are cancer vaccines. And here we've seen, the Merck Moderna trial on melanoma, which has had remarkable results. And I think you'll see, many different cancer vaccines developed with mRNA technology over the next few years. And then, there's so many others. If you look even at not that I want to push Moderna, but there are, if you look at the Moderna pipeline, I think there's about 10 other vaccines in various stages of clinical trials. Ones for, ones that may even affect diseases like multiple sclerosis, ones that can affect, Zika virus, so many different ones that are in clinical trials, and over time they'll get approved and they'll provide, I hope, better protection. Just if you look at the COVID vaccine, or the flu vaccine, standard flu vaccine made by eggs, people guess, so it's about 40 to 50% effective, but because you can make it so much more rapidly, rather than grow eggs a year in advance, because you can make it so much more rapidly with mRNA, you don't have to guess. So my expectation is that you'll see much more effective vaccines across the board with the messenger RNA technology for flu, for pretty much everything.
Thank you, Bob. That's really, illuminating. Thank you very much. Our next question is to Tejal. Tejal, what are some of the obstacles or missing pieces in achieving grand challenge of on-demand tissue and organ engineering? And you already mentioned about collaborations and interdisciplinary partnerships. And what types of things do you anticipate are being needed for this transformation to happen?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. Following on what Gordana and Bob said, they summed it up so beautifully, the power of linking engineering and biology, both at a fundamental and also a translational level. But I think one of the things that I think is really interesting is that all of the challenges we identified, whether that be immunoengineering, thinking about on-demand organs, the exobrain, or precision medicine, they're all linked in some way. And in fact, success in one will enable success in the others. And so when we think about sort of what are the missing pieces, I think what is really important is that we don't silo these challenges, that we really think about how do we further, but also make sure that we're keeping our eyes and windows open so that we can have cross-fertilization. I think there's scientific knowledge, but I also think, as Bob mentioned, and Gordana as well, is that the ecosystem is really important. As a dean, I always think about, what is necessary to really solve these challenges. And so it's not just, here are all the different pieces of knowledge. It's how do we build the right infrastructure? How do we think about engineering fields and how we're educating our students? And particularly at the interface of engineering and biology, we really need to reward that transdisciplinary knowledge. So what exactly, let me go a little bit more granular in terms of the challenges or missing pieces. I think as Gordana mentioned, right, stem cells for all, as we talked about in the paper, but doing it in a way that is accessible and affordable for everyone. I think we are at the advent of having really elegant cell-based therapies, but of course, they are for a few at the moment, and we need to really think about how we're going to scale, make that something that everyone can partake in. But I think also for real success in this field, right, incorporating, understanding, and integrating the immunological ecosystem to be able to really understand crosstalk, understand how the body accepts, rejects, integrates with these types of constructs. And then as we're developing these predictive models, right, how do we incorporate that aspect of the immune system? Because it's non-trivial, and we've had some really nice approaches, but it is something that is not just static. It needs to incorporate temporal dynamic types of interactions that may be hard to replicate, in a chip or in a single time point. For sort of the tissue engineering piece of this, I think moving beyond what we think about just cells and materials, I think, again, Gordana touched a little bit about this, is how do we extract the most vital information from these living systems and either incorporate or replicate them in engineered systems? So that might include local drug delivery devices that are really propagating the appropriate signals, factors, et cetera. It might be dynamical systems that respond and sense to changing inputs and outputs within the body. Ultimately, I think what is going to be needed in the far-term crystal ball vision is systems that are really adaptable, that can respond to external stimuli and cues, and be able to do that so that we know what's going on. It's not a black box in terms of what's happening in the body. And I know this was mentioned and almost goes without saying, but for any of these areas, whether it's on-demand organs, precision medicine, engineering life, really thinking about industry engagement and scaling regulatory and biomanufacturing. We talk about it, but I would urge our community to think about not just waiting until the end, but really integrating those communities into the early parts of the design phase as we're conceptualizing both problems and approaches. Because I think if we're thinking about really doing this for an entire community, we have to think about those issues. And then finally, I will just say, as we think about engineering challenges in medicine, one of the things I think about is not just medicine, but public health. How do we think about the materials we're developing, the approaches that we're developing, their impact in sort of other aspects of our environment, how we can sustain those sorts of processes, who has access and at what costs, and ultimately, are there technologies that we can develop here that will prevent disease before we actually need to treat them? So I will leave it at that and turn it back over to you, Shankar.
Thank you, Tejal. I'm now going to request my colleague Mike to continue at this point.
Mike, I think you're on mute.
Mike, you're muted.
Thank you, panelists, for unmuting me. Thank you, panelists, for all you've said. This is really inspiring, and it's Tejal's discussion really takes us into what I'd like to start asking Dr. Barabino. So certainly, as we all think about engineering the future of medicine and health, one of the things that COVID really laid bare was the vulnerability of our society in terms of access of healthcare and medicine. To bring it home, biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins is at scale. We have 500 undergraduates, and within 1 week, we asked them all to basically go home and be online for their education. And what we discovered with those 500 undergraduates and our 40 faculty is that not all of them had the same access, even though they were Hopkins students, which means often students of tremendous privilege. And certainly we saw that as well at the hospital and in the city of Baltimore. We really got to see the inequities that have occurred over the years. And as a result of that, at Johns Hopkins, we actually started a design program in the fresh person year, where we ask our students to do design projects focused on health inequity problems. And so having Professor Barabino on this panel really is a great opportunity for me. And so I'd like to ask you, Gilda, how do we address health inequities, which in many ways is its own challenge that sits on top of all of the grand challenges? And how do we ensure that our next generation training of physicians, clinicians, scientists, and we're completely focused on the biomedical engineering student community, ensures competencies in technology and social sciences that embeds awareness of inequity and mechanisms to eliminate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say thanks to the organizers, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. Also, Mike, your comments and Tejal's comments at the end is a good segue into this question and how I'd like to answer it. And I think at the start, we, the researchers, the educators, and the trainers must recognize that the growing equity gaps in education, wealth, and health pose daunting challenges which lead to differential health outcomes for health disparity populations. And those reasons are complex and multifactorial, and they are related to systemic barriers. In examining racial and ethnic disparities in particular, the system of racial disadvantage across housing, schooling, employment, wealth, and health is very well documented. David R. Williams of Harvard University, for example, who studies social influences on health, described the societal system as the house that racism built. And he noted how the system of racism, with its institutional, cultural, and individual discrimination components, is impacted by social forces with multiple pathways to undermine health. And as we train our next generation of physicians, clinicians, scientists, and engineers, it's really important that we do ensure that they are equipped with competencies, as Tejal mentioned, in public health and health equity, as well as their competencies in their technical disciplines and tools like AI, so that health inequities can be eliminated and preferably prevented. And I like to draw our attention to one thing. It's not just what we provide in the training, but we need to give attention to this concept of who. Often we're so focused on the science and the translation of our scientific discoveries that we miss out on the questions of who. Who is trained and who becomes the practitioners? Who has access to translated discoveries? Who participates in the clinical trials or research studies? We need to leverage the innovation that comes from diverse perspectives, from diverse populations, in our collaborative interdisciplinary work That's at the interface between medicine and engineering. And as you saw from the workshop, and as was presented in the paper that resulted from the workshop, there's talk at the end of that paper about the conclusion of how important it is to have collaborations that are interdisciplinary. So imagine the better results that we'll have if we have these kinds of perspectives. So part of the work that we need to do involves a better understanding of the various determinants of health, such as socioeconomic, sex-based, and ancestral biological determinants, and systemic racism. And the work we need to do also involves employing approaches such as user-oriented design, community-based participatory research, and a systems engineering approach to examining health and healthcare disparities. So engineers in our systems thinking, we have a much better opportunity to conduct research that leads to inclusive and fair technologies for the delivery of fair and equitable healthcare. And we can also reinforce those types of outcomes and our ability to achieve them with education. So when I look in a crystal ball, I actually see us using this understanding of the equity gaps and health disparities and how we can address them as insights for us to be more creative, for us to come up with designs that actually do work for all, for us to use the exciting discoveries and the convergence and those cross-disciplinary collaborations to be much more impactful, to take advantage of the new kinds of technologies, such as the ones that Bob was mentioning, and use them in ways that they can be reached or that they can reach everyone. So I'd like to end there, but I do feel like, as you heard from everyone, there's a way to bring this all together in a way that we can really have the kind of future that we envision, where everyone's healthy and their quality of health has improved. And these exciting technologies absolutely do make the quality of life better for everyone.
Thank you, Gilda. Thank you so much. So we've come to the point in our panel where we have the opportunity, if there are questions from the audience, as well as to circle back on some of the things that we've heard. Paolo, are there any?
Yes, we do have questions in the QA section, and I'll just put forward a few for the panel and let whoever wants to address them just come forward. The first question is from Isabel Nieto Alvarez. She asked if the panel has any comments about the role of engineering and medicine in integrating or addressing affective science, behavioral changes in neurostates, influencing or affecting physiological processes and treatment successes, which is to say, the perspective on physical, mental, emotional, and social health.
Kajal, yes, please.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really important question, and in some sense, one of the areas that increasingly should be a focus of what we think about as wellness, mental health, sort of issues revolving safety and security and psychological wellness are critical. And I actually think engineering has a very important role to play. We're already seeing from a technological perspective, advances in neuroengineering that have really enabled us to both understand, right, sort of the changes in brain signals, have been able to look at real-time ability to modulate those changes. I think we're going to see more and more of that, both thinking about technologies, again, that are scalable, miniaturized moving forward, but also having more feedback systems where we can both understand but then treat, or hopefully even prevent onset of sophisticated and deterrent diseases. I think the other piece of that is if we don't think about wellness, we won't be able to tackle all of these other important challenges. It's important that our community as a whole sort of support a healthy approach to defining these challenges. So there's both sort of the technological piece of it, but then there's also how do we create a community that really supports innovation, imports a healthy balance in terms of mental well-being, and allows us to be our most creative selves.
And just for the panel, I'm actually copying and pasting in the chat box some of the questions. The next two questions, I'll pull them together for Andrew Abila and Suparna Vituri. They relate to thoughts that the panel might have about preventative medicine and opportunity using biofeedback to reinforce healthy lifestyle choices, perhaps using wearable and technologies of that type.
I think maybe just briefly, like all of this is really at the front and center of both investigators and, you know, clinicians in pharmaceutical industry. And it's not only about engineering, it is about the medicine that is constantly shifting from focus on identifying and treating a condition to preventing it, to supporting healthy living, healthy aging. So this is really important. I would just like to add that for all of this to become reality, there is another component, which is to democratize medicine, to make it available to everyone, which is clearly not the case at the moment. So like these two things together will probably help us, like the overall goal is to live longer and better. And this is a reachable goal, but it actually requires societal efforts and government efforts in addition to what investigators can do themselves.
Thank you. Pierangelo Veltri asked if you could elaborate on the concept of avatar or digital twin in the context of predicting the evolution of chronic diseases or predicting diseases in general.
Yeah, maybe I can, I mean, this is really my area. I can give you an example. So I try to explain what they are. You're really trying not to model a human on a chip. You are modeling like a physiological unit. You're trying to model, for example, myocardial infarction or inflammation or a cancer metastasis. So you focus on subset of tissues and their connections that are relevant for obtaining realistic predictions of such system. So they are already finding a place in medicine. So a recent example was there was a patient, pediatric patient, that had a very serious genetic cardiomyopathy. System of this kind was used first to recapitulate the phenotype of the heart dysfunction in this organ on a chip system. And then there was a massive screening of drugs. They actually found that it was the cardiomyopathy was in simple words based on stiffening of the heart and inability to relax. So through drug screening, they were able to find a drug that was targeting relaxation of the heart muscle. This was all delivered to his cardiologist and was really helped guide the development of therapeutic modality for this kid who is now a couple of years after doing really well. So this is, I mean, there are much more ambitious plans, like can we make a human on a chip, maybe sometime in distant future, but I think there is a huge potential of using what we already have ability to make in laboratories.
Fabulous. We have a young physician in the room, and he's asking if you could elaborate on the future role of clinicians and clinically inclined physicians in health engineering and R&D. How can a physician contribute to advances in this area? Anybody wants to address it?
Well, I wanted to say that Gordana started the meeting by saying, I think this is a quote, "Engineering is easy, biology is hard." And what that means is that for biomedical data science, unlike data science writ large, the tight integration of molecular biology, tissue engineering, and medicine with engineering is essential. It's essential. It goes from the start. So I would say, and certainly BME at Hopkins has been, and certainly at San Diego and Columbia, Brown and MIT, Harvard as well, has been about extremely tight integration between the clinical aspects of these programs and the engineering aspects. And it just emphasized, the fact that Gordana made that statement, and then Bob agreed as well, that the biology is really essential, and it's many of the challenges in the future, and that's really the important role that we can see.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, I mean, I think it's almost, I'd say, how can they not help? I mean, when I look back at things that I've been involved in, so many of the questions that have come up have been by clinicians, like when Gordana mentioned tissue engineering. That was, a lot of that was Jay Vacanti, who was a liver transplant specialist, coming over and talking to me over 40 years ago. And when I look at some of actually speaking of Johns Hopkins, Henry Brem, who's chief of neurosurgery, coming to see me about new treatments for brain cancer, and on and on and on. I mean, clinicians just make incredible contributions because they actually know the problems. We don't, the same way if you don't have the medical background. So I think the clinicians make enormous contributions. And then obviously you take a place like Johns Hopkins, you have a spectacular biomedical engineering department. I think 4 or 5 of my students are professors there. Jordan Green already sent me a text today, who's there, and Jennifer Alicieff, and Justin Haynes, and Josh Doloff, and so many others. I mean, you guys have just amazing people, and those Tajal has a background in that, Gordana. I mean, so I just think there's so many ways that everybody works together.
And I think it also goes down to the level of young investigators. It became common to have on our teams surgeons who finish general residency, and before they go specialized, they take a time out. They spend 2 or 3 years doing research, and they return. And they are critical later. They're like this link, between science and medicine. They're helping develop technologies, and they develop this understanding for the role of research and new development. So I hope everyone feels that the future is bright. There are many things to do, but there is so much potential. There's so many things that we can do together to just make both medical and, I think, educational and societal impact in a broader sense.
I'll just add, go ahead.
That engineers are actually taking a lead in merging engineering and medicine in many important ways, and having medical schools focused on the integration of engineering and medicine. And Rod Pettigrew recently wrote about physicianeers, and he's leading a team in Houston for right. Texas A&M. So I feel like engineers are really pushing, and that is a way forward to see even stronger integration.
And I think what you're doing at Olin, I mean, it's terrific. I mean, to train young engineers, all these things go together.
There are a few questions about access, surveying internationally populations with different levels of access to healthcare, opportunities of collaborations and work done by engineers in this area. Any comments from the panel?
So the only reason I want to start is because I have to leave for the next Zoom that I have, and I would just make a comment that you only have to look at the Gates Foundation and what they've supported. I mean, they're actually the biggest funder of our lab right now by far, and they've, I think, supported all kinds of engineering advances. you know, just to mention a few, that some of the people, engineers and like Gio Traverso, you know, he's developed pills that you can swallow that can, and he's actually at MD as well. Pills you can swallow that can last for a month or longer, pills you can swallow that can deliver large molecules. You know, there's Anna developed like self-boosting vaccines. There's also, I mean, to some of the other points people made, Anna's also done a lot of work on new kinds of nutrition, you know, but the Gates Foundation supports all of it. And I think to some of the points that some of the people were making, you know, like Ilda, you know, that one of their goals is to make it universally useful and inexpensive and so forth. So I think that there's just so much going on in that area, and I expect there'll be more because of what they and others are doing. So I apologize for having to get off, but it's wonderful to see you all too. Thank you.
Good to see
Thank you, Bob. And Mike and Shankar, perhaps we can close here. I don't know if you have closing statements.
Yeah, I just want to make one very quick comment and turn it over to Mike after that. First of all, it is really illuminating and inspiring. Thank you, all the panelists. I would be remiss if I didn't add that, we did not discuss the elephant in the room, which is large data and AI. And I think this is really integrating every single challenge. I can talk for hours on how big data science is going to play an incredible role in terms of integrating this. There's even a question from one of the attendees on this issue. I want to emphasize that where engineers come into picture is the multimodal measurements, multimodal data, and the multi-scale analytics, data analytics, which is really now the hottest thing in AI. It's called early fusion, middle fusion, and late fusion of data, and how we can derive knowledge from this data. Context is everything, and therefore I strongly urge us. Mike has already told me this. We are going to organize a workshop dealing with how to bring in data into this bridge between engineering and medicine. So with that, I will turn it back to Mike for just a final comment, and we can continue later.
Let me make a final comment. When we envisioned the Grand Challenge meeting and 50 or 60 of us got together, we said, we don't know what's going to happen. This is just representative of what we as a community can create. And I just want to thank all the panelists and Paolo for leading today's event, and Shankar and Gordana and Gilda and Tejal and Bob. Thank you so much. This was truly wonderful. Thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody. This was a phenomenal panel discussion. We will stop the recordings here. It will be available on the IEEE or JMB website. So we'll send a link to everybody who attended and people who expressed interest for being part of this event. So thank you very much again. And again, thank you so much to the panelists for being here today.